Here we are again. Massive welcome to all of our subscribers, first-time watchers and LinkedIn viewers for a look today at the evolution of security testing with the technical co-founder of Cytix, Thomas Ballin. Thomas is the technical co-founder of Cytix and focused on disrupting the UK security testing space, an experienced security expert with leadership management and operational experience in cybersecurity. And starting his career as a penetration tester, he spent the past 10 years as a security champion building innovative products, services and teams to meet the needs of customers. And I think you'll agree, an amazing opportunity to learn from and engage with our guests today. So make sure that you get those questions ready. But before we bring Thomas on, and for those new to the channel, I'm your host full of man flu, Simon Linstead, and by sharing stories, germs and best practices over the last few months, it's led to over 150,000 views here on YouTube by you, our amazing 8,256 subscribers. So a huge thank you for your engagement. And if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community, or perhaps buy me a Lemsip drink, we do have a way you can show your appreciation here on our YouTube channel with 3 tiers of membership, allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So if you enjoy it, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you're watching this live, please do drop any questions in the chat. Time for me to stop talking for a moment. Let's bring Thomas on. Welcome.
Hi, Simon.
Did you bring your own Lemsip or just the beautiful view out of your window, Thomas?
No, I'm on the water and the taking in the view at the moment, just watching that last tiny little bit of sun of the day.
I think we should take a moment to appreciate that view over your left shoulder there. You're based in Manchester, I take it. Look at that for a skyline. That is wonderful.
I am indeed, yeah, much nicer. Maybe I should just have it pointing out the window for the entire conversation.
It is a little bit distracting, and I'm interested to see the colour change go through. But I'll try and look in your eyes rather than over your shoulder, Thomas. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share. We've spoken a couple of times offline, where I think I've told you how jealous I am as to what you do, and that's what I wanted to do in the industry, but I failed. So very interested to hear a little bit about your backstory before we move on to what is the evolution of security testing that you've seen over the past few years in the industry. Talk to me about you, Thomas. Where did it all start?
Sure. So, I mean, I've been in pen testing and security testing more generally for about 10 years. It all started off, and I didn't even know that pen testing was a thing at the time. And I was in high school and sixth form, and I was trying to go down that sort of traditional career path. I had this dream of being a forensic scientist, having seen CSI and things like that. But I just didn't get on with formal education. I didn't get on with the teachers. I didn't get on with the lessons. I didn't get on with the approach, and I didn't enjoy it. And it got to a point where I decided I'm not going back. I'm not going into school. I'm not doing any of that again. And I got told quite bluntly by my mother, okay, that's fine, but you either go back to school, you go work at McDonald's, or you go find a job that you want to do. And I applied and got rejected at McDonald's, but I wasn't going back to school. So I took a look at what else there was out there, and I was looking for jobs in IT. I always kind of had an IT background. I didn't even really have this sort of ethical hacking background. But I did like making computers do things that other people didn't realize they could do, which I guess is the definition of an ethical hacker to an extent. But I saw this job advertised for that. and I thought it looked really cool. So I applied for it, not really thinking very much at the time. But somehow they invited me for an interview, and I came in and they asked me all sorts of questions. Have I heard of OWASP? And I was like, no, I could guess when you said OWASP top 10 web application. I think I stringed together enough of the words that they were saying and repeated them back to them in just the right way to convince them to give me a job. And
Brilliant.
So that was how I got my foot in the door in the industry, and since then I've moved through a few different companies and spent most of my time as a penetration tester, working for large corporate entities right through to small little boutique businesses, and most recently ended up running a security testing team that was doing what most pen testers do. We'd come in, we'd spend 5, 10, 15 days tearing apart somebody's application or their infrastructure, calling their hard work and their baby ugly in a big, long PDF report, handing that over to them, and then coming back a year later and probably saying the exact same thing. And that was fine. It ticked a few boxes, but I don't think anybody was really enjoying it that much. I don't think that the testers were enjoying it that much, and I don't think that the customers were enjoying it that much. And myself and my business partner sort of said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something else that we can do to improve the situation. And we started sort of looking at what some of the challenges were, and also some of what other people were doing in the industry, not necessarily in the UK market, which I think is a little bit behind other markets. I think we can probably talk about that a bit later, but just, what else is going on? And eventually that started spiraling and rolling. And I think then one night we got very, very drunk and said, do you know what, let's just do it. And
it's always when the best ideas happen, Thomas. You see, this is why I've had none. I've not had a drink for 3.5 years now, so my ideas have just dried up. This is where it's gone wrong.
But yeah, anyway, that's the journey. Obviously that takes us up to a couple of years ago, or the tail end of 2022, when we went full time into Cytix and launching the product, and really sort of focusing all of my energy and my time into looking at the market, figuring out what it actually wants, and figuring out how we can be a disruptor in that space, and really just trying to adopt some of the common sense solutions that maybe we've been a bit slow as an industry to adopt, in my view, at least so far.
And before we go on to the evolution of testing, one thing I'd like to just ask based on that is, because the industry's done things the same way for such a long time, how have you found the engagement with companies when you are doing things different? Has it been welcomed? Have you found the change a hurdle that you need to get over? What's the experience been like?
It's a mixed bag. I think there are a few different types of customers that you end up speaking to. Like there is the fact that nobody's ever been fired for buying a pen test. So the idea that you're going to try and challenge that, and you're going to try and look at doing something different. And we're not even saying it's not a pen test. We're just saying that what you are going to end up with is not quite fitting into that same box of somebody coming in once a year to do this 5-day exercise. But some people are a bit less receptive to that than others. Other people are really enthusiastic about it. We wouldn't really have much of a business if people didn't have a problem that needed to be solved. And I think it's been slow for us to figure out how to communicate our understanding of that problem. And it's been slow for us to figure out how to communicate how we are solving that problem. But I think we are getting there in terms of, getting onto a conversation, and it maybe now being the 30-minute mark instead of the 45-minute mark before that penny drops.
Yeah, it's progress, Thomas. It's progress. So talk to me, we're talking about the evolution of testing. Talk to me about what testing was like when you started in the industry. What was the primary thing you were spending your time doing?
Yeah, I think when I first started, there was a lot more, there's a lot less of a regimented structure to how you go about doing your testing. And then methodologies have been around for decades, and those methodologies are theoretically followed. But the people that you are providing the testing to used to be a lot less informed, and also the products that you were testing used to be a lot more vulnerable to a wider category set of different kinds of vulnerabilities. And what that meant is that you as a tester, really, you probably weren't going to come in and find everything, and you probably weren't going to come in and follow through a playbook from start to finish. Instead, you were just sort of trusted to, with the time that you had, do your best to poke here, poke there, poke everywhere, and find whatever you possibly could find. But yeah, I think there's a lot of that's gone, especially with tools coming into the equation. And I think that was one of the first things that I started to see, was that tools were able to automate and move away a lot of what used to be a pen tester's primary responsibility. A lot of the vulnerabilities, the first things that you'd be expected to find as a pen tester, started either disappearing, or clients were pretty disappointed when you were raising those, because their SaaS tool or their DAS tool or their vulnerability scanner or whatever else has told them about it every single week of the year, and they're bored of hearing about it.
No, absolutely. Sorry, I was trying to do two things at once then. I was just replying to Kerry in the chat. Well done, Kerry. 732 days now, no caffeine. That is quite an achievement. I don't know how you do it, my friend. That is amazing. Do you mind if I know we're going sort of off on a tangent a little bit, but I want to bring up one of the questions that was posted earlier by Prashant, which is one that I think might sit close to home with regards to what you're doing. And it's this one: will AI make security/pen tester roles redundant within the next 10 years?
It's an interesting question, and I think, without wanting to sound like I'm removing the conversation from what the conversation's supposed to be about, I think this is the same question that every single industry has asked about pretty much every role when it comes to AI. But I don't think so. I think that AI is another tool in the toolbox, and it is going to massively change the way that we do things, just as every previous tool that's been invented. Video didn't kill radio, as the saying goes. And I think that while AI is going to make even less of the things that are currently the responsibility of a pen tester their primary objective, it's not going to remove the need for a person to be able to try and interpret what is the client's objective, what is the business context in which the vulnerabilities are being found, what is likely to be not just contextually relevant, but like a person has a nose for things that I think AI is not particularly good at. And, also people talk about pen testing and as being more of an art than a science. And I think there is a lot of that. There's a lot of truth to that. The AI can do a lot of the things that a person can do, but AI isn't imaginative. And
not yet.
Being a hacker, when it comes to the IT world, is about being the most imaginative IT user you possibly can be. So I don't think that the pen tester role will become redundant, but I just think that it won't be recognizable in its current format.
It's the same as it is now. And I think this comment here from Abhay mentions that John Strand's comment that AI will always just be a tool, just like computers were at one time, seen as something which would replace people. Similarly, AI will always be a tool as well. I think it's important to remember that, isn't it? Definitely our jobs are going to change no matter what industry we're in, but I don't think it's going to start replacing people just yet, but I could be wrong.
I think we also need to recognize that the people who are best at embracing AI and the people who are best at making AI do things other than what it was imagined to do are going to be the leaders in the penetration testing space.
To throw another quote in, it's not the strongest nor the fittest that will survive, but the most adaptable to change. I think we all know that's the case, don't we? Okay, going back to the journey then. You talked about what you were doing when you first started. How have you seen that change? What's changed since you started, Thomas?
So as I say,
that sunset, by the way, is just amazing. If you want to have a quick look at that now, very good.
So a lot of it is about that shift in responsibility and what the security tester's objective was. Originally, you come in and you try and take a look at things and just poke here, poke there, poke everywhere. And then when tools came into being able to I say when tools came in, tools have been around the whole time, but when tools got much, much better at being able to find quite a wide range of vulnerabilities and got adopted by the client before the tester even came in more, the responsibility really then started being about both being able to check that being able to interpret the information that the tools are spitting out in the context that they're given, and also being able to interpret the objectives of the client in order to feed and water those tools, in order to know which stones to turn over, or whatever the metaphor that you want to use is. I think those two responsibilities started shifting into the pen testers landscape, and the reason that or the thing that you can really do to tell that became more and more relevant is just look at the kinds of people who became penetration testers around that time. Like a decade ago, the people who were pen testers, there were some brilliant consultants who absolutely could communicate things very, very effectively. But if you look, but there were also some people who weren't. Yeah, there were some people who were very deeply technical, but not very good at those. We say softer skills. I'm not a massive fan of that term, but if you look 5 years,
essential skills, Thomas.
Yeah, but if you look 5 years ago, you'd be hard pressed to find many successful penetration testers who didn't have a good handle on that customer relationship, that client relationship, who didn't have an understanding of how to scope things, how to address the client's needs above just the standard playbook of what security testing might be. And those people who were able to maintain those client relationships were really, really the people that started accelerating. Having said that, like I say, the other part of it is just the people who are better at, or the responsibility of the tester is about still testing those things that tools weren't particularly good at. Now, that is always shrinking, and like day by day you can see tools are getting better at finding certain things, but there are still areas like business logic flaws, for example, that tools are awful, if not completely incapable at being able to find in a lot of cases. And the people who were able to understand and adopt the tools for what they can do, but actually know what the tools can't do and know what their limitations are, and so know where the best place to start looking are.
And that's the difference between just using a tool and having a complete context, though, isn't it? Knowing when the results aren't right, knowing when you need to look elsewhere. And I'm just going to bring this question up from Abhay because it's relevant, I think. He says, or she says, how much dependence is there on tools in an actual pen test? Have you seen that change massively? Is that the point you're making, that we've seen more reliance on tools the last few years?
Yeah, I think there is more reliance on tools in the last few years. There is a danger with this, that as you bring in more tools, you start to abstract the person from some of the deep technical things, you do lose a bit of the technical understanding. If you are just relying on a automation to be able to find certain vulnerabilities, and you detach yourself from the depth of understanding about how that vulnerability works, then that's a problem, because you need to understand those things deeply enough to be able to support people in being able to fix them, or to deal with the nuanced situations in which those tools aren't particularly good at finding the vulnerabilities. But there certainly is more reliance on tools in the pen testing. But where I see it more is that tools are now being used before the pen test, and I don't think that was the case anywhere near as much. Like, the clients have access to and use scanners on like a regular basis, and the clients are able to already log into SaaS portals that have results from various different vulnerability scanners and SaaS tools and all sorts of other different technologies. So when you're coming in to do that pen test, you're not the person, you're not the source of information that
that you used to be,
that tells them everything about the system, and everything that you're telling them isn't all going to be new information. You've got a different responsibility to tell them about the things they don't already know about.
Okay, good question here from Prashant, which is relevant to what we're talking about. If there is one tool that should exist that doesn't, what would it be? Well, don't say it out loud though. Just write it on a bit of paper, because someone's going to steal this idea if it's a good one, right?
And in fact, you know what? I can answer this question with a shameless plug for Cytix.
Love it.
So, I'll try not to do the plug for Cytix, but I can talk a little bit about why what we're building, I believe, is unique and important. So, So what we're building is around the ability not to build the best scanner or to build the best pen testing system or anything like that, but to be able to intelligently determine what the right tool or person or combination of tools and person is to test each individual system depending on lots of situations. So every time like a change occurs, say somebody's introduced a new form field into a website, or say somebody's deployed a new server or configuration or something like that, we exist to be able to identify that that change has occurred and figure out if a scanner should be used, if a manual pen tester needs to be used, if a combination of the two of them needs to be used, or if some other system needs to be orchestrated in order to get the fastest, most effective and most reliable results for somebody. And I think
so. Is this the tool of all tools then? Is this what we're saying?
It's the thing that sits beneath the tools and tries to
Yeah.
be intelligent about what's right to use in what situation. That is. We're not there yet. We are on a journey. We're able to do a lot of this manually. We look at what changes are occurring, we look at the systems and we figure out what's right. And a lot of that, a lot of my time is spent just looking at these tools and researching them and figuring out what is available to be used in these situations. But
I suppose that's a never-ending job, isn't it? With more tools coming out every day. It is a
never-ending job. But if we crack this ability to figure out what testing should be used under different circumstances and actually to be able to support people in that, then I think that people can start making changes with a lot more confidence and not blindly having to trust that running a scanner once a fortnight or bringing a pen tester in once a year is the way to be able to find all their vulnerabilities in the other couple of weeks since the scan or couple of months since the last pen test just have to be written off as something may have happened, something may not have happened. And giving people that peace of mind in there that's the tool that I think should exist, and hopefully we're the people to build it. But
I think it answers Andrew's question. Good to see you, Andrew. Hope you're doing well. Are we getting to the point where a full-featured app could execute most of a decent pen test? I think the answer there from Thomas is yes. He's working very hard on that. Watch this space, perhaps.
Well, so where a full-featured app could execute most of a decent pen test, I think it depends a massive amount on the specific technologies and the specific architecture of the application, and also the objective that you're trying to achieve. Even things like a well-tuned Zap is able to accomplish a massive amount and inform people of loads and loads of information. And if you're making 4 or 5 or 100 or 1,000 changes to an application a week, then you're going to get a much, much more decent result out of having a decently tuned tool than you are out of having a pen tester who is just sweating and panicking and trying to deal with all of this mountain of information. So I think the tools are able to do some brilliant things. Like I said before, there are also things that they are god awful at, they cannot do, and I don't foresee them being able to do, like testing business logic flaws or like being able to interpret some of the results and understand whether or not information returned in a log or whatever else might be useful in a specific situation, or identifying what's the difference between personally identifiable information versus somebody's Facebook profile picture, things like that.
I think that leads us on to Dr. Mike Brass's comment that he put on LinkedIn earlier as well. Now, whilst I don't want to talk about individual tools or platforms, let's take this as a generic question about emerging automated tools. Combined vuln scanners, automated attack surfaces and attack pathway finders, which you can set different levels on, including simulated attacks. Do you think they're going to have a big impact, or any other thoughts around that?
Yeah, there's quite a lot to unpack in that.
There is.
In that question. So I'm not going to comment about Node Zero. I've never used the product. I've not dug into the product.
And they don't pay me a penny for sponsorship, so I'm not going to mention them either.
Having said that, the brackets help me understand a little bit about what they do. So vulnerability scanning, I think we all probably have some handle on what that is. The automated attack surface, an attack pathway finder. So automated attack surface identification, enumeration, identifying what the potential avenues are to be able to ingress into a business. An attack pathway finder, being able to understand how you chain various different vulnerabilities together in order to get a more complete picture of what an attacker might be, or in order to make one vulnerability more serious in a given situation, or even just understanding how one vulnerability that might be an informational vulnerability, if you fix that, makes it impossible to exploit a higher risk vulnerability. They're all incredibly valuable tools. Now, the question, so the ability to set the different levels when you start talking about some of these sophisticated tools, that's quite a cool thing that's coming in at the moment. So being able to tune the tool, not just so that it works with your technologies, but being able to tune the tool so that you can, like, security is, your security maturity is something that you have to do in stages, right? You don't come in one day to a business that's never done security and say, okay, I'm going to find all of your vulnerabilities. You go away and fix all of those vulnerabilities, and then you are secure. You come in and you say, okay, I'm going to spend, I'm going to run an automated scanner. Those results, I might validate those results, but those results are probably a good place to, pick off the low-hanging fruit. And then I'm going to do something slightly more sophisticated. Maybe I'm going to do some external infrastructure and application testing. And then, like, eventually you get to things like red teaming and all of that kind of stuff. So being able to automate a massive amount of that and give a lot of that, put a lot of that in the client's hands to be able to sort of to tune to what they think their maturity level is, and discover whether or not they're actually at that level, and then maybe dial it back a bit, but still then be able to perform these repeatable tests so that they can see when they've got to that maturity level, then up the level to a more sophisticated attack, and maybe even bring in some new tools and things like that. That's a really exciting prospect, I think, in terms of the way that tools can be looked at, and in terms of the way that we can think about not just building the tool that can find the most things, but building the tool that can give the user the most valuable information to help them make their risk-based decisions, which is fundamentally the information we should be providing to people.
Absolutely. A couple of funny comments I'll just bring up. Andrew Bunch said, give me a bunch of Hack5 tools in your app and put me on a pen test. I think that's an ask for a job there. And Abhay has asked a question. I don't know how relevant this is, but you said you didn't want to do a sales pitch for Cytix, but it seems like people are begging you to do so. So Abhay says, I'd be curious to see how Thomas's tool would handle things like chaining of vulnerabilities. Is that relevant, Thomas?
So it is. It's one of the things that we've talked about quite a lot internally, but there are some tools that, like, there's a lot of people focusing on that problem, and there are some tools that I believe, like, there probably already are some tools that can do that I don't know about yet, coming out of, funded businesses that are just coming out of that that sort of building in secret and being
stealth
published.
phase.
There are already tools basically that are trying to address that problem, and what I don't want to do is end up trying to compete in that same market as them. What I'd much rather do is we start at the beginning and we figure out when that tool, when the chaining tool is the right tool to use versus when the ranking tool is the right tool to use versus whatever else, and just be able to sit underneath all of those and work in harmony with them, rather than trying to compete with any specific.
And you see that a lot in this industry. I mean, I've only been in here 3 years, but you see some of the more traditional players then wanting to become a bit of everything to everyone rather than focusing on what they're good at. And if you look at some of the financials of some of them, I'm not going to name names because I'll never get sponsorship again. But if you look at some of the financials for these big organizations who've tried to become all things to all men / women, it doesn't particularly work well. So I think the focus on doing what you're really good at and giving people that kind of independent assessment and direction as to what they want to do is a really exciting prospect, Thomas. I'm excited to see what happens and what comes next.
Yeah,
we've been fielding questions. Sorry, have you got something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think so. Like, there is always the argument point product versus solution, and the argument about whether you do just want to focus on one thing and lots of things, and customers will always sound like what they want is a complete, or I say always, a lot of the time will sound like what they want is a complete solution, when in reality they do just want to solve one problem, really, and that is going to be the influencing decision. I will say that, like, I think you do have to settle for a little bit of both, but that's where open source is a brilliant opportunity for you. So, like, if all we're going to do is detect changes and suggest what to do, that's not going to work for a lot of companies at the moment, because it's like, if they've not got everything else already fitting into that ecosystem, then they're going to struggle to make the best use of it. But if if we're able to do that, and then we can just bring in an open source tool that's able to do attack path mapping, we're able to bring in an open source tool that's able to do scanning of infrastructure or applications, and we're able to partner with all of these brilliant solutions that maybe have ugly wrappers but have incredible capability underneath them, then we don't have to worry about whether we are a point solution or a point product or a solution. We can be that, we can focus on that one challenge while still offering the complete package. I think that's a massive opportunity that open source gives us.
100%. Just flipping the script a little bit on what we're talking about, because we've got a couple of questions that relate to, well, one's about breaking into the industry and one's about continuous professional development. And I'm going to bring up the one about the continuous development now from Beth. Good to see you, Beth. Really good to see you back in the community. I hope you're doing well. As there needs to be continuous education and research for testers, how do you justify the time taking away the actual testing time in your job to your managers and executives? I suppose slightly different now you work for yourself, but how did you deal with that before? And is that an issue?
So it's hard to sort of address the problem. It's hard to quantify the value that you get out of that learning time, especially in something like penetration testing, which, although there's exams and qualifications and training courses and all of that stuff now that is more structured, but I think pretty much everybody that I speak to, and I imagine everybody who tunes in, will agree that most of what you learn through unstructured diving down deep rabbit holes, and it's hard to go to your boss ever and say, like, can I have 5 days? I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with it. I saw this YouTube video that seemed really interesting. I'd like to watch that and see where it takes me. But it is a necessary thing that your manager has to accept as a part of is part and parcel of the job. And I think one of the opportunities that traditional consultancy at least does give usually is that there are gaps between jobs. If a job finishes on a Thursday, probably nobody wants to start the next job until the Monday. So these days will come. These days will come, and you just, I think, need to have queued up in the back of your mind. These are the kinds of resources that I'm going to want to look at. These are the kinds of objectives. Like, I want to skill up on this area. I want to skill up on that area, and just be ready that when that opportunity does come up, you can say, look, here is the package of resources that I'm going to be focusing on. Here is the goal that I'm going to be striving towards, and make that argument that you are so prepared that nobody can really say, yeah, but are they going to use their time, appropriately? Because that's always the difficult thing, I think, for a manager, is just to make sure that
it's trusting your employees that they're going to use their time wisely, right?
But they will have to, right? And if a manager doesn't trust you, to be blunt, that's not a relationship that you should be. Yeah, exactly. Like, these are valuable skills that you have, and there will be other people who do trust you to do them. But I think you just need to come into it with a sort of sense of maturity to be able to say, like, you need to be ready to explain the value that you're going to get out of it. You don't necessarily need to explain exactly the route that you're going to get there, but
and I think you've hit the nail on the head. If you find the right employer, that's never going to be a problem, because they'll see the value in that. And I'm not going to drop names here, but I did some consultancy work for a firm nearly 2 years ago now, who I didn't feel particularly welcomed at this organization. I'll be perfectly honest with you, but all the testers within that organization were the happiest people I've ever met, because the person running it was a tester, and he gave them as much time as they needed for self-study and self-development. They helped them with their exams and their continuous professional education. So a lot of it is about the organization that you end up working with. And while we're on that subject, Kian's asked a question here, which I'm sure there's a few people watching who'll want to know the answer to. And I'm not sure if there is a one-size-fits-all answer to this question, Thomas, but what's the best/most effective way for a person to get into pen testing as a career, and what could be done personally, skills-wise, to achieve this? Don't fail your OSCP like me, Kian. There's the answer.
Well, I mean, you say don't fail your OSCP. I think sitting something like that, or just showing that you've gone out of your way to treat this as more than just a job, but as like a core interest for you, whether that is you deciding off your own back to sit an exam, or whether that is you writing a blog that you actually write more than 3 blogs for, you actually contribute to reliably once a fortnight or once a week or whatever for
consistently,
month on month. Yeah, if you're going to see talks and you've got some record of that, if you're engaging in the community and just going to meetups and things like that, being able to show somebody that this is part of who you are is, I think, it's definitely a way that I find the people stand out to me. Not necessarily the way for every person who hires people. You know, I think there are people who value different things. Some people would want to see you have an incredible skill in a specific area because that's their area of passion, and other people might want to see you have a bit of breadth because, no offense, if you can do infrastructure but you can't do application, you're probably not useful for most pen testing companies. So you know, it will vary from person to person. All I can speak is my own personal view, but it is that, like, somebody's going to have to show me that they've got passion, because there are, you know, 200 unread messages in my LinkedIn mailbox at the moment from people who are saying, you know, can I have a pen testing job or something like that?
Oh, well, at least that sounds more polite than some of the ones I get.
Well,
Give me a job I got last week, which I thought was quite good. Okay, I'll just find one for you.
Well, we're before the watershed, so I'll.
Yeah, we should be careful, and I suppose that leads us on to, we've opened up a can of worms now with Abhay's comment, which is, how do you get 3 to 5 years experience for an entry level job? And also, and this is it a contentious point? I don't know, because I think I know the answer to this, but not many people are brave enough to say it. Is there an entry-level pen test role at all, Thomas? What are your thoughts on that? 201,
well, you
201 unread messages now. Kean's just sent you one as well.
You asked me what my thoughts are on that, having just admitted that you have an answer. So go on, I want to hear your...
Okay, I'll hang myself out to dry first through personal experience. And this, to put it into context, I've loved technology my whole life. My first computer was one of these. Even when we had an MSP in my financial services business doing all of our IT and stuff, I was still the one with my hands on the keyboard because I loved it. I may have been involved early days in the illegal downloading of films before anyone else was. I've always tried to do things, I suppose, a little bit against the curve. But when it came to taking that jump from thinking I knew a lot about computers to then studying to become a pen tester, I had knowledge gaps this wide. So from my point of view, if you haven't got the networking experience and the fundamental underlying knowledge, I think it's a stretch to say there is an entry-level pen tester role without those skills. But that's my own personal opinion. Don't hate me for it, people.
I think I'd second you really hit the nail on the head when you talk about the foundational and the underlying knowledge. There are people who have spent 5 years in the industry and still only know how to use tools. And that gives a lot of people a bad name. There are also people who are 16 and have really just learned these things, like how a website works, how HTTP as a protocol works, who understand what ports are, like, as an actual concept. And those kinds of people are, I think, far, far more useful to a business. But being able to gauge whether the 16-year-old with no experience or the 40-year-old with 10 years experience is going to be the more useful person is difficult. And I think a lot of people sort of slip into maybe trying to streamline the recruitment process by saying, if you've made it 2 or 3 years in pen testing, then maybe that's a good indicator for you. I think there are entry pen
or you might just have done 6 months at lots of different firms.
Yeah, I think there are entry-level pen tester roles that don't require 3 to 5 years experience, but you need to make sure that you are very efficiently communicating that you do have those foundational skills in order to shortcut that process of proving that you've built up this knowledge. I think you also, what's more important to me than any of those technical skills is that you've got those, again, we come back to those foundational skills, those ability to understand customers, understand how businesses work, understand what risk is as a concept, because those are the kinds of things that are much, much harder to learn. I can hire somebody and in 6 months' time scale them up to be a reasonable level of competency in testing, but it's going to take me many years of sitting right next to them if they can't communicate to a client before I've got the trust in them to leave them alone to test with people. So I think being able to communicate really, really effectively, that you know the foundational skills, and also you have that sort of base depth of knowledge in technology, not necessarily security, but technology, are going to be the things that allow you to not need 3 to 5 years of experience, in my view.
Thank you, Thomas. And before we get back, and I suppose I could segue onto this now quite nicely, but I want to bring one more question up. But before I do that, this was about the evolution of security testing. And my 18-year-old, he's landed his first job last September as a cybersecurity apprentice at Aviva, and he's in their offensive team. To his mind, when you talk about pen testing, he's all about the cloud, because that's where in his head he thinks everything is. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because I want to talk about how much that landscape has changed since you started. But just to keep it on the breaking in theme for now, Kean's question about home labs. So would a home lab with VM servers, networking, etc., make a person trying to break into a pen testing career stand out alongside things such as Try Hack Me and Hack the Box?
Do you know, I think one of the things that would really make you stand out the most in having that is saying you knew how to configure those things to begin with. Like the fact that you're able to like to test those things is great, but like you say, there are things like Try Hack Me and Hack the Box out there. You know, there are already loads of rig machines that will help you do that, but you have to have a depth of knowledge in order to configure an AD estate, and you have to have a depth of knowledge in order to deploy applications and tune an Apache server and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's something that's going to pique people's interest. But you could probably push it a step further. If you go and, like, once you find those vulnerabilities, if you go and actually you carry out the steps to remediate those vulnerabilities on those systems, because of course you've got access to them in a way that you probably don't on Try Hack Me or Hack the Box. Although I admit it's been a while since I've taken a poke at any of those sort of CTF kind of things. If you've done that, then that puts you leaps and bounds beyond the people who are spending time on those sites.
And I think for me, Hack the Box was brilliant, but what it did for me was lull me into a false sense of security as to how much I actually knew and what I could achieve. And it became quite apparent after about 35 minutes in that OSCP exam that perhaps I just learned how to follow processes rather than understand what I was fundamentally doing underneath. And I think that would be my biggest bit of advice to anyone, is make sure that you understand the fundamentals first. But we've got like 3 or 4 minutes left. I want to finish off on the evolution of testing. Talk to me about how much it has changed the last few years from what you were doing before.
Yeah, so I mean, as I say, a lot of it has come down to customers adopting tools and customers adopting processes and moving things internally, so that the responsibility of somebody who's performing security testing now is not about finding the vulnerabilities, but is about interpreting those results and being an independent person who can understand the business, the wider business context. But the other thing as well that it used to be that security testing was a game of cat. Well, we've always said security is like a game of cat and mouse with the attacker, right? It's that you are trying to learn about the kinds of vulnerabilities that attackers are finding, and you're then trying to use those same tools, techniques, and practices in order to find those vulnerabilities before they do. It's no longer, in my view, about that. That is not the cat and mouse game that we're in now. It is now a cat and mouse game about developers. Like, developers and engineers are moving at a much, much faster pace than threat actors, in my view. They're co-opting new tools, new approaches, new technologies. The languages that they're using require completely different steps to remediate than they did even a few years ago. Like, they're using low code, no code solutions, things like that. They're like I say, they're pushing changes 5, 6, 7 times a day. Obviously, when you're talking about those kinds of scale, we as a community are having to invent new solutions to be able to catch up with them and to be able to test at the kind of pace that they're able to test at. So I think trying to look at ethical hacking as a game of trying to understand what the adversary is capable of doing is good, but having a depth of knowledge about what the engineer and the developer does and how they work and why they might be introducing vulnerabilities and all that kind of things is the next stage of evolution to what security testing needs to be in order to continue to provide value to people.
Okay, in that case then, let's translate that into skills that people can learn to set themselves above the rest then, Thomas. What can people focus on to help them with that?
Understanding what the software development lifecycle is probably one thing that's pretty important. Understanding how stuff goes from a developer's IDE to a code repository to another branch, to being promoted, to being in a staging environment, to being into production, and understanding how that works at different businesses will be a really useful way to just to get to grips with where you're testing and what kinds of things you need to be looking at testing for.
Where would you go as an avid learner to do that? Because there isn't a course for that, is there, Thomas? So what could you
I think that there are courses for that, but those courses are aimed at developers. They're aimed at engineers.
Okay.
I think we need to recognize that we are a part of the development process and we are not this detached unit from all of that, and need to start looking more at those developer resources to be able to we don't need to be developers. We don't need to understand how to write every line of code.
But you need to understand how it works.
But we need to understand what their processes are, and we need to understand we need to understand what they're up to in order to get a real appreciation of what kinds of mistakes they've made, what kinds of edge cases they may have introduced, and that kind of stuff.
Thank you so much. We're pretty much out of time, so I'm just going to drop a link to it's Cytix, not Cytix, like how I said earlier.
It is Cytix. Yeah, it's too polite to say. But...
no, don't ever be too polite. I'm a 50-year-old man who can't pronounce things properly, so I have to be told. Link to Cytix is here if you want to find out a little bit more about that. I would normally at this point, and I will drop Thomas's LinkedIn profile in the chat, but do be warned, he's now got 204 unread messages, so it might be some time before he gets a chance to get around to saying hello to you. But I'm sure if anyone would like to find out more about the work you're doing at Cytix, you'd be happy to have a chat about that, Thomas.
Absolutely, more than happy. And if anybody's ever in Manchester as well, swing by. We Digital Security Hub in Manchester. It's a nice little space with loads and loads of cybersecurity companies who are always looking for fresh talent.
I should come up there and have a look myself, really. I think we're due in Manchester in March. We've got an event planned up there, so I'll keep you posted on some details for that. But Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share today. Perhaps you'd come on and join us at a later point and go through in a bit more detail about what it is you're doing at Cytix and maybe demonstrate what you're doing there a little bit more. I'm sure the viewers would love that. But Thomas, the sunset's gone. It's time to wrap up the event. Kian said InfoSec Live event in Manchester in March. Just haven't got the date yet, but I will let you know. Everyone, have a great rest of the evening or afternoon, depending on where you are, and see you all really soon. Thank you, Thomas.
Cheers. Bye now.
Bye.